everyone, happy Friday, and welcome to this this incredible hour that we're going to have talking about leadership presence. And this is a fantastic topic. I know that so many people, get the feedback about, hey, you know what, we need you to, get strong in your leadership presence, or you're too strong, or this, that. And so we're very, very fortunate today to have Sandy Babey with us. And Sandy has years of executive leadership experience, P&L experience. And so this is going to be great, talking about real world application of examples of how to strengthen your leadership presence. I always like to do some research, before these topics. I mean, certainly have my experiences, but I really value research. What's been done, what have people seen in other companies? I love the academic part of it, the people that have run studies. And this one, the term that came up really frequently was this term elusive. Leadership presence or executive presence, this elusive term. And especially when we receive it, we think, what is that? Because there's so much under it. So I'm going to share some things that might be helpful here. But it's how you show up. And when you look at some of the terms, they go, it's the it factor, the X factor, it's gravitas, it's, words like that. But what it's not something that's just attributed to your business results, right? Because going back to that whole thing, like, yes, you need to work hard. Yes, you need results. Is that enough? No, it's not enough for most women. And this idea of relationships, gaining trust, influence really matters. It's also not reflective of your true qualities and potential, right? Because how many times let's flip this around a little bit. And before I say that, this is not a men versus women or women versus men, because as we all know, the idea of, having trust, having those relationships, that cuts across female to female, male to male, etc. So we're going to talk about that too. Sometimes what happens when we have conflict with other women, sometimes it feels very deep. So sometimes you hear terms: confidence, composure, credibility, connection, charisma. So looking at all of these things is sometimes a little, very difficult to say, well, which one is it? So there's an author that you may have heard of, and a researcher, and she does speaking. Oftentimes you'll see her articles in Harvard Business Review. Her name is Sylvia Ann Hewlett. She's done a lot of research, and the most that I really could find in this area, or certainly in the last 5-10 years. And as she did all her research, she said, listen, there's 3 pillars of executive presence. I like the way that she said this, because it gives it some shape, some form that we can relate to. The first is, and this is by far the biggest component, she calls it the core. It's how you act. And she calls that your gravitas, right? It's this idea of, and again, you'll hear this, the it factor, the X factor, right? That person has, something special about them. And she considers that the core. When she talks about this, it's also what she says is, in general, people that have gravitas that's lasting, they tend to really know their subject matter. And she said they're not an inch deep, they're 5 feet deep. And it's not the only factor, but it's the idea of, they know what they're talking about, or certainly they can convey knowledge in a way that is coming across as if they know what they're talking about. Second one, and you guys brought this up, this idea of communication, getting our point across, being succinct. We know that building trust with others, a component of that is communication. And within that communication, it's the ability to get our point across quickly. We're going to talk about that more in just a second here. And then how you look, appearance. Sometimes people say, well, gosh, it's all about what you wear, it's whatever. And that's not really true. Is that a component? Sure. but it's how we hold ourselves. It's whether or not we're trying to make ourselves as small as possible, or we're engaging and we're like making eye contact with people in that way that's confident, right? We walk in a room and we say hi to people and we shake hands. How often have you walked in a room or just observed a leader and the leader goes and sits down? Boy, do you go, that person has, gravitas? No, we'd like to see that person that comes in, and you can look at some of the, people that have been presidents, and some of them have had this amazing ability to make every person feel special. And that is definitely a way that this is described. So you put these three things together, it telegraphs to others, right? I've got what it takes. I'm in control. And not only that, people would say, I'd like to follow her. I think she would be a fantastic person to work for. And when you hear that, you think, okay, I'm doing something right. So gravitas too is also described as confidence and grace under fire. I love this one because when things are calm, still, what if the stakes are high, things are calm, sure, it could still be nerve-wracking. But what happens when there's tension, right? And that thing of, as they say here, grace. And, I don't know about you, but I can certainly think of times when I definitely did not have grace because I was so invested in the topic and the decision that was going to be made, that I sometimes crossed over the line and was too, I let my emotions be shown too much. That's not always bad. But when it crosses the line, you're like, yeah, I'm not sure I'm being so effective right now because I feel pissed, right? I feel angry. I feel whatever those things are. So we're going to talk about, how do we manage that? The decisiveness, because oftentimes too, we can think, you know what, if I just go with the flow. The higher you go, the less you can go with the flow. Because people expect that, as leaders, we're going to be decisive, that we're going to have a point. This also shouldn't be confused with some people have a point on everything. That's not the way to go. I just have a point when it matters. When I was, first a manager, and I thought, okay, I've got my opinion, and I would give my opinion, too readily. I would have been sick of me. And so I had to learn, like, people don't want to hear my opinion on everything just because I'm the boss, right? And so that thing of allowing people to grow, and not having to put a stamp on everything is certainly a great learning. Emotional intelligence, integrity. Now, how often have you seen in a meeting, you've seen both sides? The one side of something's kind of going down, you're like, that just feels not right. Maybe the person's intent isn't there, but you're like, that just doesn't feel right. Maybe it's a way that dealing with people or dealing with the situation or, whatever's going on there. And there's times when the leader goes, when I look at, our values or my values, that's not really in concert. I know that's not our intent, but, we should act in a way that we're going to be proud. And sometimes when the whole group is moving to a solution that's over here, that can be very difficult. But you always want to be in a place, of course, where you can live with yourself. Your reputation, your standing, someone's gone to a great college and that could carry a lot of weight as well. But it's not one thing, all of these things, and certainly vision and charisma. So let's talk about some tips here. The first is, and this, get in there in terms of physical space. Now, in meetings that I've been in, many, many times, there's those seats that are around and then the seats at the table. And sure, we could sit, around the table, but do we? So I see, and I used to tell, women on my team, well, you get up to the table. So sitting back there holding the booklets and all that, it's all, awkward and can't write or put your laptop down, whatever it is, get up to the table and claim your space. Another thing that women tend to do, we tend to make ourselves teeny, teeny, teeny small. Who's done that? It looks like this. It's kind of like pretzel woman, right? We put our arms over here, we cross our legs, we're like in one, teeny part of the chair. No, you know what? You want to put yourself out there, come across the table. That idea of making eye contact with people, as hard as it is, putting that cell phone away. Because if you try to make a point after you've been, doing texts or whatever, for the first 20 minutes, people are like, yeah, see ya, where have you been, right? And so it's that idea of being present in our space, claiming our space. And that's even as you put your stuff down, don't try to make it so tiny. It's your space over here. Claim the space, both physically and with just your overall presence. The next one, and I mentioned this, take a stand when it matters. So, you don't want to be that person that gets out the room and go, oh my God, what were they thinking? I can't believe no one said. No one also includes us. So does it matter? And sometimes, again, I had to learn this lesson. I had a boss that said to me one time, he says, Taurus, you need to lose the battle to win the war. And at first I thought, hey man, I hear you, but I don't think so. And he was right, because over the years I would practice like, does this one really matter? But when it did matter, I was right up there at the table. So manage composure and non-verbals. This is what we were talking about earlier. This idea, and well, I'll tell you, I mentioned I had a couple of people that would really get under my skin, and I would be sitting there, and I had this point where I'm like, okay, this is effective. And then you get a little bit further, you're like, this is not effective here. And over here is like, you've then lost your shit, right? And I would allow this person, because this person's not causing me to do it. I'm doing it to myself. I would, the person would be getting emotional with me, and I would be, you know what, that's not right, this is whatever. And it became about the two of us versus the topic at hand. So being able to, I actually made myself, this is like 10 years ago, I made myself one of those silicone bracelets, and I put some bracelet and I put some words on there for me to remember what's important. And I needed that, especially when stakes are high and we're tired, right? And we've been working, and so that thing of remember what the thing is that you want to influence. But even when someone's running us over, right, we can't go there because we lose our impact. So we're going to talk with Sandy too about, what lessons has she learned in this area. The nonverbals, and sometimes it's like this, are, there was a couple articles that said sometimes women will do too much of this. We're nodding our heads, right? You don't want to keep doing that, right? Every once in a while, yes. But if you're doing this, or they call it the puppy dog thing. It's like, So we got to watch that stuff. Now, does that mean you're a robot? No. What it is you're not telecasting everything, right? You may feel that inside, and other people, can you imagine facial expressions every time we felt something? I mean, that would really be funny, and there's a lot of movies like that. So that's something to really watch. So this next one, okay, ready? You probably know this one.
You remember that? Yeah, well, that was a good one. Well,
what's that?
Excuse me? Yeah.
Okay, this one I hear or don't hear all the time, the low talker. The person goes to make a point and they go, and everyone goes, what? And then they raise it a little bit. The reality is that if we're in a meeting, or sometimes even in a one-on-one, but certainly in a group, we have to project from our diaphragm. It's a big room there, and we may think we're this loud, but we're actually this loud. So practice projecting. You're going to need that, especially when people try to talk over you. So don't be that low talker, and don't tell yourself, well, that's just my voice. It's not. You can learn to project. And project, if I'm doing this, and if I'm doing nonverbals of covering my mouth, and I'm talking like this, how does that compare if I'm sitting up, I'm making eye contact, and I'm projecting? I might be using my hands to talk, And we're going to get to the succinctness in just a minute. So remember the low talker. Okay. Have you ever seen, well, of course you've seen jump rope, but like a double dutch. If you've seen that, right, you know that timing is an issue. And sometimes what we can do is wait for that perfect time to jump in and make a point. And we don't, it's like this, right? And if we keep doing that and wait for the perfect time, what's going to happen? The meeting's going to be over. So you've got to be in a position to jump in, even though it might feel a little bit awkward. Don't wait for that perfect time, because the perfect time, someone else may think that's their perfect time as well. And that's going to be a challenge. So think about that jump rope. And if you want to see some funny stuff, just type in jump rope fails on YouTube or Google. No one got hurt in it, but there's some funny things that it makes me think about meetings, right? Like, hey, I'm going to try to do something cool here. But the idea is jump in. The next one is be logical and succinct. Here's the thing. If you have a tendency to be a think talker, right? The think talker does this. Well, I was thinking about such and such, and, I kind of was looking at this side, I was looking at that side, and, I could see both sides. By that time, you have lost the audience. The succinctness goes directly to trust, and it goes directly to impact. So one of the things to think about is to express yourself in bullets. People want to know what the heck, and as higher you go, you may have heard that term, be brief, be gone. If people want more information, they'll ask you. So you want to put, my point is X. And, I base that on, think about bullet points, no more than 3, this, and this. And you get off of it. If people want to know more, they'll ask you. This is particularly true, not only participating in meetings, but it's with giving a presentation with PowerPoint. We want to look at, fall back on, I'm going to read everything on the slide. People can't, we can't stand that. Like it's torture. And then our leaders have checked out. So don't fall on like, I'm going to script this thing out and memorize it, because you know what, how stressful is that? I don't memorize anything. I got points that I want to make. Don't try to, memorize it. Trust yourself. And guess what? If you screw up a little bit, so what? Everyone does. It's just in our own mind. We think it's this big miss and I'm going to forget. You won't forget. You might trip up on something human. All right. So get in the habit of thinking in those bullet points and expressing yourself in those bullet points, starting off with my point is. Also, this was interesting. I did not know this, but in some of the research was found that if you give your opinion and you say, or your point, my opinion on this, or the point is, or I believe X, Y, Z, because. And what the research demonstrated here, it didn't even matter what came after the because. And it's so very interesting. So thinking about, interjecting that, you could practice with that. I believe we should do because, it's the right thing to do. But really interesting research. The other one is power of the pause. If we are still collecting our thoughts, it's okay to pause and not just do a run through. Now, I worked for a leader who was masterful. And I don't know if they meant to do this, or I kind of think this was a strategy, and would ask questions and be quiet. So you'd answer the question and then there'd be silence. Well, you know what I would do with that silence? I thought of it like a big hole, right? And I try to fill it in with just whatever came to mind. And then one day the leader said to me, you need to learn to focus more. And I thought, damn, you know what? It's me trying to fill this hole in. So I asked other people, like, when you're talking to that leader, do they have this like pause and it becomes really awkward? It could happen on the phone, in person. Like, oh, yes, absolutely. So I learned a lesson. It did take me a while to feel comfortable with silence, not to always be the one to fill in the hole, right? If you've given your answer, it's okay. Right? You can sit there, and what feels like an eternity is really only a few seconds. You could also play different roles. This, because sometimes we're like, oh, I don't have anything to say. Well, that's okay, because you have other roles that you can take on here. You can summarize what's going on. You could be the trial closer. You could be the person that says, let me throw this out here. What I hear us saying is this, this, and this. Is that fair? The challenger, let me play devil's advocate here. What we're saying is X. What if the reverse were true? What if this were the assumption? So thinking about these different roles. The connector, I heard you say this, Sarah and John, you've said this, putting these two things together, it seems like we have whatever a pattern, whatever the situation is. The goalkeeper, what happens in meetings, we get off task and to say, team, I'd like to just bring us back on task. We have 20 minutes left. We've got to get here. What I hear is then you combine it with something else. And the involver. This is a really nice form of leadership. And there are people sitting around the table that have something they want to say, but they're not putting it out there for whatever reason. You know what, Karen, you haven't said anything today. Do you have any thoughts? So the many different roles versus just being the person that has the answer. Now, the hit and run, I've just got a couple more things. This is when someone's talking over you, right? And I call it the hit and run because it happens and then they're gone with their point. So you got to be prepared with your points. When someone says you're talking and they just run over you, go, just a moment, John. I'm not done with my point. Happy to pass the ball to you when I'm finished. But, calling their name out is a good thing. Some people say make eye contact. Other people say don't. I don't know if it really matters, but I got used to in the last part of my career saying the person's name like, hey, not in a shitty way, just, hey, Barb, if you could just give me a second here, I have something I want to share. And if you could first start off because it's like this, right? You're in there and everybody wants to get in the pool at the same time. But what people are counting on inadvertently is that you're going to be the one to stop talking. Don't. Keep talking. Project more. That's why being that low talker, when you don't project, it's game over, right? Because someone's going to come right over you and you can't stay in the game. So you just keep talking. You know what? And don't feel like, oh, that's rude. It's just part of what's going on, in a meeting. Keep going. Okay. The other thing is, don't say sorry. How about this one? You're talking. The person jumps in, talks over you, and you go, oh, sorry. What are you sorry about? No sorries. No sorries, because again, diminishing, our own power. Flex your style. There's not one style that makes things effective. So sometimes you're going to have to be that assertive person that, you use your power of, assertiveness to say what's on your mind, to, claim the space. And sometimes you're going to be that uber collaborator. You know what? Again, John, really great point. I appreciate you saying that. And, I try to avoid corporate speak because it seems so disingenuous. Like, I don't say stuff like, I'd like to build on that point. It just doesn't, I don't know. I just think there's ways to say stuff without sounding these empty phrases. But you got to use that whole style. So flexing. So what we're going to do now, those are just some tips and tricks and tools. We could talk about a lot of this stuff for a long time, guys. But what we're going to do now is talk with Sandy Babey. And I'm going to switch over now to Sandy. She's going to come on up here. And as I was sharing with you, Sandy was vice president. We met when she was a vice president at Johnson & Johnson at Ethicon, and also like a tough business medical device. She's held a lot of senior leadership roles, went over to BD where she's a vice president there, has worked with, and managed very large teams, super successful executive. And I really wanted Sandy to come on because I think she's got great presence and, the ability to interact in highly competitive situations. So big welcome, Sandy.
Thank you so much. It's great to see you. First off, let me just thank you for the whole concept of the mentoring place. It's been a joy to be part of your live stream Fridays, and then obviously to be a guest with you today, which is just a treat. So thank you so much, Denise.
Oh, listen, you know what?
We got lots to do.
Pleasure. And I know it's something too, I didn't mention that Sandy has always had a lot of passion for mentoring and helping other women be successful, not just women, other people be successful. And I'm really looking forward to working with her more in the mentoring place. We're putting a management team together. So I've been talking with Sandy, and maybe if I twist her arm a little bit more, but I'm really,
You're hooking me in. We're good.
yes, a very special person.
Great. Thank you.
So Sandy, welcome. I know you've seen a lot of these things that I mentioned. And if you think about your own leadership journey and that whole idea of, leadership presence, what are some things that if you think back to when you were in your 20s and you get some of those rude awakenings and then you get a lot of finesse over time, what are some lessons that you've learned and how did you come about learning those lessons?
Yeah, first off, thank you. I love this topic, although I will tell you, I think it's probably among the most difficult topics for us to talk about because it is so complex in that concept of being elusive, right? Because we hear the storyline of executive presence, which is really also code for other things, and we should probably talk about what that means as well. But when I think back of obviously, learning and establishing my style, to me, what leadership presence or that gravitas is all about, it's sort of the culmination of your self-confidence, your self-awareness, and how you basically express yourself, right?
Yes.
Why, for me, it's so critically important is it's really not just about the leadership part of it. It's really about that trust and that confidence that you spoke about, right? That so that others will follow you. It's about establishing followership. And so that becomes critical, So to me, it's one of the most important culminations of all of those things of what leadership is about. And how other people perceive you. I think that's what's critical.
And if you think about your style in your 20s versus your style now, how would you contrast that? More tools in the toolbox? What have you learned?
So I think you touched on a couple of those, like to the point where I was embarrassed reflecting back 25 years ago or so. Particularly when I think about, hard lessons learned, right? I'll call it that emotion modulation, right? I tend to be a person that has a tremendous amount of energy and passion. And so there was times where I felt convicted and principled about something and just wanted to win at all costs. So that whole thing about battling and which ones you battle versus not. I remember very distinctly having a leader pull me aside and he was a great leader. He was one of the presidents when I was at J&J, and he pulled me aside. He said, Sandy, he said, you are my right-hand person on my leadership team. And he said, but I got to tell you today, you just killed me in that meeting. Cause I was in one of those meetings where I just was sulking. Like I was doing I was in a bad mood for whatever reason. Right. And he goes, you don't understand that when you walk in, you shifted the room and I couldn't get anything done today. Right. And I was like mortified. Right. So think about it. So that modulation of what you feel on the inside versus what you're expressing on the outside. I mean, that's to me.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I read was that this person came up with this mantra, and it was about when they saw someone else's face, and let's say it's your boss or it's something, not to assume that person's facial expressions are about you.
Completely.
And have you had that experience where maybe, you even assumed like, hey, that person is, doesn't like my point, or they don't, whatever, but that wasn't the case.
100%. I mean, I think what's interesting is just in time, when I think about just overall self-awareness and self-management, right? Because that's essentially what that's about. And the maturity of that, essentially where I've boiled this down to as I've gotten more experience is that I think about me more than anybody else thinks about me, right? And that it's typically not about you, even though you're in your own head talking about it, right? So I think that's really important, is to kind of, again, that self-awareness and that self-management, that it's not necessarily about you. And the other piece that you spoke to, and I think that ties directly to that style flexibility, right? And one of the greatest lessons I learned, again, earlier on was, I remember very distinctly some feedback that came in my probably first real coaching, environment that I had, or a coach for the first time. They were grooming me to be future things. And one of the areas of feedback was that I can come in and I could be assertive or aggressive, and I could shut down a room. And it particularly happened with, interestingly, more introverted females. Men could actually kind of contend with that, right? And at first I'm like, well, that's their problem. You try to deflect your feedback, right? I'm being a little sarcastic. But then I realized, wow, like that's the last person I want to be, is someone that would shut a room down, right? I want to actually foster communication open. So that how do you, again, modulating your style, so learning how to talk slower, learning how to pause, right? Learning to engage and smile in a way that would show, you know, an affinity or attraction rather than command. I wasn't looking to command. And so making sure you're modulating that was really important for me too.
Yes, and if you could talk a bit about, because you know, medical device, you know, is definitely more diverse now. But if you think back to even 10, you know, 15 years ago, you know, not the most diverse industry, and so oftentimes I would imagine you were the only, you know, leader in the room that was, you know, female or one of a few. How did you learn to navigate in that environment?
Yeah. So I think, you know, I grew up similar to you playing sports, and I think that actually is a great training ground because most of the people I played sports with were male. So I was very comfortable in that environment, but without question, women, you know, the unconscious bias, the conscious bias, all of those things that all of us bring to the equation, not just between men and women, just in general. It's just a reality, right? And I never looked at that as a weakness or a vulnerability. I just looked at it as something that I needed to personally manage, right? So everything from not only being the only female often on a leadership team, but, you know, being like a foot shorter than everybody else. And it sounds silly, but, you know, I wear jackets all the time. I'm wearing my jacket now. It became part of my stature because I tend to be smaller individual. And for me, it was like putting a costume on, right? You know, and putting on this uniform, like, you're ready. I'm ready for the dress rehearsal. Let's go, man. And it sounds minor, but those are things that really became important. I never was a soft talker or a low talker, right? But I learned how to use the voice at times to very clearly make my point. And then also that clear and concise is really, really powerful. That was feedback that I had gotten in a positive way early on in my career, which was, you know, Sandy, you have a way of kind of coming in after those clouded conversations and really kind of crystallizing kind of the trial, you know, the closer there, right? Kind of summarizing where we are in such a clear, crisp way. So again, I took that positive feedback and said, okay, that's something that I need to continue to leverage, right? So that the voice is heard.
Yes. And one of the things I've always appreciated about you is you're very good at using humor. And so it really helps, you know, connections, puts people at ease. What advice do you have about using humor? Who should use? Because sometimes if it's not in someone's nature, I would say don't go there. But humor can be very powerful. What are your thoughts on that?
No, I can't. And to me, it's my greatest, I'll call it, you know, defense and offense at the same time, right? And it just is something that, again, was groomed in our household. And it's pure. I actually, interestingly, going back to research, I just read an article yesterday or the day before that talked about how women in humor actually is often very negative, right? It's perceived negative, right? So one, I think it goes back to the most important thing, I think, through this entire mentoring place, I know that you want to communicate is how are you personally authentic, right? Yes. I know that humor is something that over time I use well. Like I can use it when it's proper. But I'll also tell you it's typically self-effacing humor, right, in a way, or it's in a way that is really directed, you know, never towards somebody else or at somebody else. I don't have cutting humor. That to me is funny. But it's more about adding levity to a room or looking at the environment. And I think to me that cuts, going back to confrontations, going back to, you know, tense situations. I mean, to me, that's my entry point, is just something to break the ice and then get your point in. But it is that fine balance. You have to know the audience. You have to know who you're contending with, what it looks like, and you have to know, I'll call it that, you know, again, it goes back to self-awareness, right? As much as you can in understanding your impact and what that means, right? Yes. But I think it's powerful. When people use it, I think it is just one of the greatest things, right? Because, I mean, who doesn't like to laugh? Right? Absolutely.
Now, I want to share you with the members here of our community. And if whoever has questions, we've got a lot of comments here. Alexis, do you want to, if you have a question, raise your hand, okay? And you can, you know, ask Sandy. Sounds like a show. Ask Sandy. Okay, I'm going to just, I work in a company where several of the very senior leadership are quite abrasive and yell at each other. It's the first time I've worked in that environment. I'm usually the person that gets along with everyone. Do you think there are certain places where confrontational leadership behaviors are actually more valued? What are your thoughts on that, Sandy?
You know, I will tell you, there was, I think one of the most important things, this is less to do with executive, I'll call it presence, and I think more has to do with culture.
Yeah.
And worked in an environment where it was highly competitive at the top, and kind of yelling at each other was something that was a norm. I didn't stay there long, and I mean that sincerely, right? Because it was not a place where I felt comfortable. I could definitely stand toe to toe with somebody, but for me, that was not my natural habitat, right? I was not going to survive in that environment. But I think if you're sitting in that environment, and I can think of situations where I've had to confront somebody that, you know, was in that tone. I mean, that's where I personally brought out my self-assuredness and my values, and just thought, no, it's not going to happen. And have had very direct communications around, you won't treat me that way. Very, very personal, one-on-one, took all the courage I had. But to say, you know, with all due respect, this is a work environment, and there is no reason for that kind of tone, or there's no reason for that. And I won't stand for it. Now, again, you got to be ready to take that stand. But for me, that was, you know, I've been in that environment, and I wouldn't compromise myself to be there.
Yeah. That idea of, you know, the respect piece. I always, and I think you're this way too, of that, you know, if it happens once, you're like, okay, the person had a bad day, they had a whatever. And generally, you know, someone might come forward and apologize, or they're too embarrassed to. But when it happens that second time, you know, that third time, then like you said, I'm at whatever private conversation. When there's a, you know, a barb in a room and it's directed at you, I don't let those things go. I'd be, you know, that's where the humor thing comes in as well. So yeah, absolutely. Oh, someone said, for a great example on the impact, projecting your voice as a female, watch The Iron Lady about Margaret Thatcher. I saw that. That really is good. That's a great example. Okay, and we have someone that would like to ask a question, I think. Alexis, is that right?
There aren't any hands raised at the moment.
Okay, no hands. Okay. Well, one of the things, if anyone has a question, just go ahead and raise your hand. But one of the things that I did want to talk about, because this does happen, going back to that situation where you're in a meeting and you're trying to get a point across, and someone interrupts you. Or it could be that you're in a one-on-one with your boss and you can't get a word in edgewise. What do you do in that situation?
You know, I listened to your example, and I could think of, you know, a ton of times where that has happened, right? I mean, there's no question. Again, a lot of this is about reading your room and knowing what audience, you know, who's sitting around you, right? If it's a leadership team, if it's your peers, if it's your boss, obviously very different. I mean, I have often, again, used that humor where, let's say I say something, because I think one of the, not only just being talked over, but you'll put out that great idea, and then the guy sitting next to you, and I'm using guy as an example because it typically is, literally says the exact same thing, and everybody's like, John, that's the greatest idea. And so I've, you know, in those scenarios, again, knowing the proper, I'm like, wow, I think there's an echo in this room, because I just said that, right? I mean, I've literally called that out. The other thing I've said is just in again, much more pleasant, but then a gentle voice, which is, you know, I love the fact that you built upon my great idea. Thank you so much for that.
Right. You're right.
You really own it, and then thank you for building upon that, or thank you to adding my great idea, right? You know.
Yes.
But it's all about timing and tone, and
sure is. Yes, the thing. It sounded just as good the second time.
Exactly. Yeah.
So good. Oh, this is a really thoughtful question. This one's, thinking about shutting people down. One of my worst fears as a leader is being seen as tone deaf. What advice do you have for avoiding this and staying connected to those you lead? I love that question. What do you think, Sandy?
I mean, I think that's like kind of the $1 million question of today. And I mean that because, again, for all those that are on the phone, whether you're there today in a big leadership position, or whether you will be and you're aspiring to be, you will be there someday, right? And it's very interesting to have to make that transition. And Denise, I'm sure you can think of it, where you go from the I to the we.
Yes.
And it's a gradual thing. It's not like somebody just ordained you overnight and says, Sandy, you are now a leader, you know, a team leader, and now you are thinking we, you're no longer thinking about Sandy first, right? But that evolution occurs and it happens. And that goes back to that self-awareness and style flexibility. And so, you know, I could very much close a room down at that time when I think about who I was, right? I mean, and it was, but what I realized is, and again, this is where self-awareness came in, is I'd walk out of the room and be like, well, that was not how I wanted it to go, right? So very, very clearly made deliberate choices around opening up meetings, asking questions, being silent, literally, and allowing the debate and the discussion, so that I really wasn't even the leader in the room. And I ultimately created a leadership style that I think others that knew me later in my career would realize is that when we would have team meetings, it was as if I was part of the team and the discussion was part of the team until the last 5 minutes, right? Where the 3 minutes are the deciding factor that says, okay, all right, we've had that conversation, open discussion, dialogue, let it go. But it's absolutely important to just close your mouth and listen and then be the collector, right? Be the aggregator of the ideas. That's
Absolutely
the greatest lesson learned.
That's well said. And I think the asking questions, one of the things that I started doing, in the last, I would say 5-6 years, I would say this to people, and I know it's going to sound harsh, but they knew I meant it. If the leader says, hey, can you give me some feedback on that? What do people do?
Nothing. You're good. You're great.
Yeah, so it's good, man. It's good. But I would say, hey, guys, listen, beat the shit out of this idea, please, because I'd rather have it beat up here,
exactly.
Versus outside. So giving people, that might not be your language, but whatever that language is, to use something different to say, you know what, beat the hell out of this thing, right? Because you really do want that input. And also asking other people, what do you think? Someone play devil's advocate. So, I think those can be very powerful. Okay, we've got another one here. Have you ever had to give your management constructive feedback on their leadership style and techniques? What are some ideas on navigating that potentially awkward conversation? What do you think, Sandy?
Listen, I think whether feedback in general, right, is a balance. It doesn't matter who you're giving it to. And one of the things I somehow have come to learn, and I think particularly again for women, is when you're in that work environment, it's objective. I know it's personal, but it really is objective. And so feedback is about the object, right? And even if the object is the person, right? So there are ways to phrase things and give a person feedback about how they communicate or their style or whatever it is that is very objective and kind of more fact-based and oriented, so that it doesn't come across personal in any nature, right? So whether it's, you're giving your boss feedback because he shuts down the room or she shuts down the room, there are ways to say, I noticed when you allowed the room to a little bit of space, did you notice how Jane just kept talking and added this great idea? Again, figuring out how to be objective about the what, what you're trying to give that feedback. I don't know if that's clear enough, but don't personalize anything in business, because at the end of the day, it's very personal, but it's not personal.
Yeah. And, one of the techniques that I've used, and has certainly been used on me, is when someone says, hey, Denise, I know, your intent is to do X.
Yes.
It's not coming across that way because of blah, blah, blah. Right. And so giving the person, some credit, because, there was this big leader that used to call it the shit sandwich, right? So you start with the positive, you land the middle, hey, but, and then I know if this is addressed, this could be all great. And so that idea, right, of giving person the credit, then saying, I am sure that you don't want to come across this way, but here's how it's landing.
Yeah.
Leaders would cringe, right? They'll be like, oh God, sorry. If the person's like really lacks self-awareness, there's not too much that you can do, but everyone, is concerned about their legacy and their impact. Nobody, everybody gets, or most people, multi-rater feedback. And so, they don't want to be known as that, but bringing to their attention, they actually may trust you more because, you got the gravitas, the chutzpah, whatever you want to call it, to bring it to the person's attention. Now, I always appreciated that. What I didn't appreciate was if someone was giving me feedback every 5 minutes. So it's, it's that thing of being selective. Okay, we've got another one here. I am currently working on a high focus project where the lead is very derogative and is bringing down the team efficiency and morale. Taking the higher ground is getting hard. What should this person do? And should they take the higher ground, Sandy?
That's a tough one to answer. I mean, I think again, there's sort of, I'll call it patience in allowing, teams to play out. Teams are an interesting dynamic no matter what, right? But I think if it is literally getting to the point where it's now a destructive culture and environment, then some intervention has to occur, right? I don't have enough of the background to tell you exactly what needs to happen, but I do think, going back to what you just articulated, Denise, is how do you share that feedback around the impact? And I couldn't agree more with you around all leaders typically want feedback, real honest, solid feedback. Most people don't go in intending to be a jerk or, being not productive. And so I think as much as you can figure out a way to provide that feedback to this person to make the team and that individual more effective, it's your obligation. That's leadership, right? Is to do difficult things, not just easy things.
Yeah, absolutely. And, something that I know that, when I've given feedback to other people is to say, we're all here to do a job.
Exactly.
And, we're get paid to do a job. And, when we're not in concert with that, that's, no one can feel good, right? Because we want to earn our paycheck. And certainly, we want to do right by, everyone wants to belong to a purpose that, is important. And so sometimes bringing that forward, you may be very surprised, like in this situation of going to the leader and saying, you know what, I've lost sleep over this moment, and whether or not I should say anything, of just showing your vulnerability. But ultimately, I decided that it wouldn't be the right thing for me not to speak up, and, tried to help the team in this situation. The person, unless there's really something wrong with them, and if there is, that's a whole nother conversation. But for that person that can be caustic, you could say, this is how it lands on people, and then the impact on the project is X. So it's not just about your feelings. It's about this project and what we're here to do. Sandy, we've got another question here. How do you ensure to make a lasting impact with senior leaders when you are the most junior member in the room? What are the top 1 to 2 most effective strategies to be memorable and being considered for broader opportunities? That's a great question.
It is. And it's a tough one too, right? So I think, one, again, you talked about prep, and you talked about kind of, I'll call it, making sure you have the substance. Right. Without question, you have to have that. Right. When I think about my most vulnerable moments in front of executives, it's because I probably didn't do my homework. Right. I wasn't exactly as prepared as I should have been. Right. So that is like core number one, because then again, that's your foundation of confidence. Because if you're walking into any room that has any element of intimidation, and you're not feeling as confident as you can be, then you know what, you probably should have done a little bit more homework. Yes. I think that's really critical. The other piece is just this also ties into, I know we're going to talk about branding in future, like personal branding in the future, right? It also is about you being authentic to who you are, right? I've seen, it's not even about always being charismatic. It's not about being an extrovert or it's not. Some of the most impactful leaders I know and have worked with are deep introverts, but when they stand up, they establish their credibility. They know who they are. They're comfortable in the skin of who they are, right? And they're able to tell a story. And I think if I had to say, particularly in front of senior leaders, if you could stand up, authentically be who you are, even if you're scared to hell inside, show an element of confidence and self-assuredness and tell a story, know what your story is. That will have impact. You can't critique that. That will have impact. And I think that's where some people don't do the homework, and they don't necessarily think about how can I really have impact here, but still be Sandy, still be Denise, still be James, still be whomever that is.
Oh, that's so great. You answered several questions because someone asked about, what if I'm an introvert? What if I'm shy? And a lot of leaders are tend towards being more introverted, and it's the way that we use our energy. And, so when we're extroverted, we get energy from, other people. Introverted, right? That can take away energy. It takes more energy to be around other people, but we're also, can be very, you said it, Sandy, very deep, thinkers. So that idea of bringing insight when you're younger, I also, and I think you're the same way, I really appreciate when someone is like, they're up and coming and they're a challenger. Like, you know what, I was thinking about this, and, I don't know if this perspective is right, but let me throw this out there. And, I always loved it. I'd be like, good for that person.
Yeah. I think so. And I think the other thing, particularly when you're presenting to executives, you know, they're going to know more than you most of the time, right? I mean, they have more experience, they're going to know more than you. And that's why if you can come off confident in your materials, and when they ask you the question and you don't know the answer to it, you know, it's just, you just confidently say, you know what, that is a question that, you know, I actually would love to get back to you on that. I haven't thought that through that fully. I mean, you don't have to be perfect.
Yes.
Right. But if you're credible and confident and, you know, again, project that, you can have flaws. People are going to forgive you. People aren't expecting you to be perfect.
Absolutely. And if someone's doing that Jeopardy game with you where they're just going to ask you a bunch of stuff, but it doesn't matter, you know, that's a good time to say a lot of really good questions here. But if I could bring us back to the, you know, the question at hand, and these are, you know, they're good questions. They're more tangential. If I could bring us back, you know, if you don't mind, to the main points, because sometimes it's just a test. And if you just call it like what it is and say, okay, yes, I'm happy to, the team can get back to you, you know, if we want to prioritize, you know, answering those questions. Sometimes person, I was just wondering, right?
Yeah,
so
exactly. Yeah, you were actually just kind of playing with me is what you were doing. You know?
Yeah. And you know what, this is a good question. If we could just take 10 seconds here, and then we're going to let Lisa in. But, you know, a good friend of ours is saying, how do you effectively balance assertiveness and our directness so that others, especially men, don't view you as the B word?
It's probably one of the most important things you can do. And I think a lot of that has to do with whether you're verbal, you communicate verbally directly in that way, but it's really about establishing your personal credibility and collaboration. And I think with men, it's about being assertive, but never being their competitor in their minds, right? And I think it's a really, and I think we should talk about that some other time in the future.
Yes, I think that's a great question.
Yeah, perfect.
It's great, the whole male-female dynamic, but it's also sometimes the female-female dynamic. So that is a really great question I think we'll take up. So with that, let's go ahead, and this is an awesome, Sandy, you're fantastic. We're going to have you on many more times. And but what we'd like to do now is take advantage of this incredible opportunity that Lisa Tyson, who's been a vice president at 2 large organizations, now is a performance coach and a consultant, has been working with me in the area of you know, bringing in professional, certified, and highly experienced differentiated coaches. And she brought this really cool opportunity to my attention. So let's go ahead and bring her in. Here we go. Hi, Lisa.
Hi. So just wanted to do a quick shout out to Sandy and Denise. That was a great discussion. Obviously, leadership presence is so important. I think it's a really nice segue into this opportunity too. When you think about who are most effective, you know, what do those people do? What's really key about them? And it's really them knowing themselves and understanding themselves. I was doing a little bit of a fist pump here and a cheer every time you guys said something about self-awareness or knowing themselves, because those things are really key. And one of the ways that individuals can do that is taking advantage of an assessment. So it's really, you know, again, no right or wrong answers, but it gives you some more insight. And I know for myself personally, I've taken several different insights over the years, and I think each time I definitely learn more. But it helps me either get a little bit more comfortable in my own skin, and also gives me a better appreciation of how I can be more effective as a leader. So what we're really excited to share with you is an opportunity. It's a collaboration here with the Mentoring Place, TTI Success Insights, which is actually the developer of the tool, and then myself. And essentially what we're going to be offering is an opportunity for a free assessment. And the tool is trimetrics. So you don't need to get hung up in the name trimetrics. The thing that I would call out though is the try piece. Because what's unique about this tool is it's actually going to give you insight on 3 different areas. So the first one is behaviors. So it's a portion of DISC, which many of you are probably familiar with. But it's really how do you do what you do. And what's nice about this is it gives you some perspective, not only what's your true self, so we heard a little bit about your authentic self, but what do you do, or what's your preferences for your true self, but then how do you adapt based on the environments that you're in. So that's the first component. The other area, it'll give you information on driving forces, which really is what motivates you. Why do you do what you do? And then the third one is some insights about your emotional intelligence. So your self-awareness and how do you really learn about others. So we're going to be offering this complimentary assessment. As an individual, when you receive this, you're going to get a customized report that'll give you your results in those different areas. And then you'll also have a debrief session. So I'll set up some time with you. We'll go over the report. You can have an opportunity to ask any questions and hopefully give yourself some more insights to knowing more about you. And I would definitely encourage you.
Lisa, what the value of this, if someone were to purchase this, what would it cost?
Well, it typically can be included in a coaching session, but just to have an assessment itself, it could be $150, $200.
Yeah.
It could go up from there, or it could vary from there a little bit. But yeah, it's definitely can
really
be
awesome.
An expense.
Yes. And how do people get in on this, and how many people?
Yeah, so we're going to randomly select 20 people. What we're asking is that you respond, say if you're interested, to contact@thementoringplace.com. We'd like you to respond by the end of day on April 12th. That way it gives an opportunity for some of the members who will be listening to this on demand to also be able to participate. So you don't have to memorize all of that information. We're going to have a portion of it included in the newsletter, so you'll know where to turn to. The key thing I would just call out, though, is that this is a limited opportunity. We need to do this within the April timeframe. And if you do get selected, it's about 25 minutes of your time to take the survey, so it's pretty quick. It's all online. It'll be easy to use. And again, if you're one of those winners, the 20 people that get selected, you'll receive all the details and the necessary information.
That is awesome and very generous of you with your time, Lisa. So thank you for doing that. And as Lisa mentioned, if you're interested, just send a note out to contact@thementoringplace.com. And, over the next week, we'll take all the people that are interested and randomly select, and Lisa will get back to you very quickly. So I want to thank both of you, and Sandy, big thanks to you for sharing your insights and wisdom, and for everyone that has dialed in today. I know it's a beautiful day in many places of the country, so thanks so much. And we're also really looking forward to sharing the feedback from the survey and talking more about some plans for the summer, because this community is about belonging, and we really want to develop it for you. So I hope you have an incredible weekend, and we'll talk to you real soon. Thanks.